Hello, everybody. My name is Gary Huntley, and I am happy to be hosting this session of State of Vegetation Management. This is actually our third episode in this series. And today, we're fortunate to have someone from Arkansas Valley Electric Co-op, and they will share with us their experience, their journey, if you will, through vegetation management. Just a little bit about me. I retired from Entergy about 18 months ago as Vice President of Distribution Services. One of the key areas I had was vegetation management. And so today I'm happy to host this session, and I'll let Barrett do a very quick introduction, if you will.
Good morning, Gary. Thanks for having me. I'm Barrett Ewing, Director of Engineering Operations at Arkansas Valley Electric Cooperative. Just a brief overview of Arkansas Valley. We serve about 60,000 meters in western Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, have about 6,500 miles of distribution line, cover 14 counties roughly. I am fairly new to the electric utility world. I've been with Arkansas Valley for about 5 years. Unfortunately, we've got a team that makes up for my inexperience, and I'll try to do my best job today, be a pathway for kind of the experiences we've experienced. And I kind of look forward to the discussion, look forward to also making new connections here and learning from other folks.
Thank you, Barrett. And today we'll be focusing a lot on how to balance budgets, resources, and reliability. And all of this, of course, tied into vegetation management. The first thing we'll kick off, why don't you give us a little description of the challenges that you've seen and faced at Arkansas Valley over the past few years, or since you've been in your role as you described?
It's probably a common one everybody has: rising costs across the board, not just for, I know vegetation is the big topic here, but we see it everywhere, right? Equipment, operationally, building line, all those pieces. And it's really what's driven us probably to this conversation. And we've seen contract labor increase, just materials increase, all those pieces. And those have been the biggest changes for us to figure out how do we move forward, what's the next steps, all those pieces. Arkansas Valley is actually in the middle of a fiber project deployment for a smart grid for electrification, but not only smart grid, but for broadband deployment. And that really magnified some of our issues with our right-of-ways and our vegetation, our right-of-ways, to be able to get in, not just maintain our existing line, but get in those right-of-ways to put up a new strand and a new fiber to allow us to deploy that project. And those costs have been significant, and it might not have lined up with our existing rotation. And then a lot of issues that we've also seen are easement widths, right? We've been around for 85 years, and so they're all over the board. We've tried to standardize over the last 20 years, but we see issues there that we're constantly battling. I would imagine everybody sees. So those are some of the majors.
Yeah, that seems to be pretty consistent what we've heard in the previous sessions. These rising costs have really hit the utilities pretty hard. And so from your perspective, what period of time has that been for you? Have you seen that different utilities have different contracting strategies? Some have had costs locked in over a period of time because of those contracts. Some are strictly T&E. How have you seen those costs change, I guess, over the last couple of years or 3 years?
I'd have a hard time giving a percentage on all of them. It feels like you're right. It's the COVID age is what we've seen that drive. And on the contracting side and in-house side, fuel cost has been a huge driver of that. But you're right. It's been over the last couple of years, and it wasn't all at once. So they've been significant annually, but they feel like they're still on that same trajectory, and that's the concerning part now as we look over the next 3 to 5 years. How do we manage those, knowing that we're already having to try to make cuts, and how do we manage the budget that we expected we would have? And that's where we're feeling the pains.
Yeah, I think that you're certainly not alone in that area. And so, what have you done with these budget pressures? Have you changed the way you manage those budgets? Do you change the way you look at that? And what sort of actions have you taken from a budget management perspective to deal with those cost increase?
Yeah, I guess the other piece of this is the leadership here, particularly our board and the leadership below them and then us. Everybody knows the importance of maintaining the right of ways from a vegetation management. And so we've tried hard to maintain what we had set in place years ago. And I think we'll talk about some of that later. We've been able to manage it so far, but one major thing we've done is look for multiple contractors. Our bid process, make sure we're reaching out to vendors that we might not have used in the past, and make sure we are getting the best bang for our buck, and be able to drive some costs that way. And our per foot cost, our per mile cost, we've been able to try to stabilize a little bit over the last 2 years by doing those pieces. We tried some innovative stuff, drones, and it helps a little bit. It's not going to be a complete game changer. And ultimately, it's what's led us to looking for data-driven solutions with AI Dash and looking at how we could be more efficient with the spending money we've got, and how do we now move forward for the future, knowing that what we've done in the past isn't sustainable.
Yeah, it sounds like it's the necessity in terms of managing that budget it's really caused you to start looking at some other alternatives there. Can you speak to in-house versus contract labor? Did you have a pretty good mix of that, or how did that might affect your work plans?
So we have a in-house right-of-way department that consists of roughly 15 personnel. Historically, what we've used that group for is mostly work orders, doing new construction, doing service orders. We haven't used them for our reclear program to maintain our existing right-of-ways. That's historically we've used contract labor. We've done a pilot this last year with using an in-house crew for a small substation we have to see what kind of time commitment we would have to see, so we could start doing some comparison with contract labor versus in-house labor. We put a substantial amount of time into doing some analysis to look to the future to say, okay, contract labor is clearly increasing substantially. And we've been fortunate to have good contractors over the years. There's always challenges there at times. Do you get the work that you're paying for, and how do you police that? How do you QC it? All those things. So we are intrigued by moving forward with some potential moving some of that workforce into in-house workforce, but we haven't made that jump yet. Obviously, there's some challenges there from an equipment standpoint, and how do you turn up something of that size? We're cutting about 1,000 miles a year right now, which takes quite a few personnel to maintain that, quite a few right-of-way hands. So we're looking into that. But our initial analysis has showed us that it could be a potential cost savings.
That sounds good. And I think one of the challenges about the bringing it in-house is that the flexibility of having the contract resources has always been a benefit, right? So when those budgets fluctuate and you make decisions about what to cut, when to cut, just being able to onboard those resources only when needed had been pretty beneficial.
Yeah, one challenge we've seen on the flip side of that, one challenge we've seen from a contract labor standpoint is we typically bid out an area to bid, right? And so we're not very nimble when it comes to, if you change your mind,
Yeah.
might need to be cut. And I think that's what drove us a lot towards the software data-driven solution, is having that data ahead of time and know exactly what needs to be cut, and maybe it'll solve some of those problems.
Yeah, very good point. Barrett, that kind of leads into this next piece. Can you give us a little bit of a view of how you've managed vegetation historically, what process you had in place? Can you walk us through what that looked like typically?
Yeah, I'll try to give you a little history. Like I said, I wasn't here. I've been here since 2017. So back in about 2015, 2014, I think our reliability numbers were fairly high. We had a lot of overtime work that was being done to respond to outages. Right away at the time was typically being done just by hotspotting and cutting when there was outages and maintaining it that way. We had a guy in place at the time that had come into the right-of-way program and was starting to revamp it. Could see we were still spending a lot of money to do that. It just wasn't very efficient. And they looked at setting up a rotation plan, because our right-of-ways hadn't been maintained historically very well. So we had 6,000 miles of line. We looked at trying to cut about 1,000 miles a year. So they set up a 6-year rotation. We started that in about 16, 17. So we just now have seen the completion of a full rotation. So we knew all that needed to be cut. We knew we needed to get to it at a certain time frame. But now we're saying, okay, is a 6-year rotation really right? Is that what needs to happen? And we know it's going to be costly to continue down that path. And now that we've been through our right-of-way and we know we did a good job the last 6 years, some of it might not need to be cut on that same rotation. And it's led us to this idea of, okay, how do we get the data we need? We've tried, it's too labor intensive to drive it out, right? You can't go physically look at every piece of it. We tried some drones. We have some in-house drone program here. We got some pilots licensed, and we started flying right-of-ways, which was also labor intensive. And then we really just had video. Now, what do you do with video? You have to have some way to analyze it. And we didn't find that was helpful to the contractors from a bid standpoint. Fortunately, I ran into the AI Dash group, or they reached out to us, and I sat through a demo, and we've had an opportunity to do a pilot study now. And my background's engineering, and so I'm very data driven, and am hopeful that having some more data to make decisions is going to help us through this process of how do we move to the future.
Yeah, sounds good. I think you certainly had a manual component to this, right, on the front end. And it sounds like that's pretty much been every utility's journey, right? You just had boots on the ground, really going out doing the assessments. What about the actual development of the work plans? It sounds like and historically, when you collected this data manually, it's just a matter of just getting people together in a room or having a conference call and putting together that information. I don't know if you had spreadsheets or what you use, but just to come up with what the actual work plan would be once you've collected this data from that manual process. What did that look like in terms of once you've collected that data to what you actually handed to a contractor?
Yeah, so I think from our standpoint, we knew the right of ways had never been maintained in a very structured manner. So we knew we needed to get through all 6,000 miles of it. And it was more of a set it up in an efficiency way. So from territorially, right? So we wanted to lump some state substations together. And we wanted to lump that 1,000 miles that we were cutting a year, pretty close vicinity of each other, just from a contractor standpoint. So they didn't have to deploy and do a lot of travel time between locations. So once that was set in place, we stuck it out. We basically finished that 6-year rotation and said, okay, we know which 1,000 miles, but it still was a manual process to gather all of the maps and get the maps to the contractors, get the bids done annually. That's still very manually. We're still doing that today. We have a fairly good mapping system of our electric grid, and we have a good software platform on the electric side, but we generate maps and hand those maps to contractors, have them bid on them, and then they manage those via paper, and it's a challenge.
Yeah, I think that has been, again, that your story sounds to really be consistent. And the other sessions that we've done, I think those are some of the same comments that we've heard from utilities, frankly, from around the world. That's just been the way in the industry that's been managed. You did talk about previously, you made some comments about other technologies. You talked about satellite, you talked about LiDAR. With any change, there's got to be some sort of change management, right? You've got people that you're wanting and needing to access and utilize these new systems. Can you talk a little bit about what that change management process looked like for your and what successes or pain points you might have had with that?
Yeah, like you name it, change is always hard. It's technology adoption. We've pushed really hard. Arkansas Valley, historically, and even in the early 2000s, 2010s, a lot of things were done via paper. So there's been a lot of technology adoption to iPads and to the computer systems and the software running on those that we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years. And so I think we've got the people in place, the personnel in place that are willing to adopt it, but we have to dedicate time to trainings. We've got to make sure we put the tools in their hands. And I think it's easy to say, let's use this tool for this one piece that the tool offers, right? And you train on that. And then the rest of it goes to the back burner because it is hard to use all the pieces that might make life more efficient. But some of we have a fairly young workforce. We've lost a lot of knowledge on retirement side, but we have some people that are used to having phones in their hands all the time and have used computers growing up. And I'm seeing that to be a fairly easy sell from our standpoint, that this will make your life easier. I think once you get a couple weeks into it, they say, oh, this really is a lot easier for me to use, and you really get adoption that way.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Do you have a one particular piece of advice, I guess, for folks who are going through what you've went through that to look out for? Is there one thing that sticks out, maybe that one or two, maybe that you'll say this is an important part of change management, and maybe it's something you wish you had done, or just some observations?
Yeah, probably some luck getting supervising. Some of the people in leadership roles are the leaders of your workforce that buy in and help through that process. And I think we have people here that have done that. So I don't know that I definitely can't take any credit for that piece or give a lot of advice on it. But I think we've been fortunate here to have people that were willing to adopt.
Yeah, I think that's a key part, right? So it's in any job, but certainly when you're dealing with change, you've got to have people who are willing to make the change. And really, in my experience, there were two things that stood out to me. One was having people that you can really point to as leaders in that change management. So they'll help others along the way if they see that they're running into some challenges, just either learning the technology or new processes or what have you. The other thing I found to be very helpful was incentives. It's as simple as that sounds, but for me, it was small things like the number of times they access the system, was just paying attention to that. And to the extent every area has their own sense of what's important to them from an incentive. Some people wanted shirts, some wanted caps, some wanted gift cards, that kind of thing. But excuse me, I found that those things were pretty helpful.
Those are good ideas. Yeah, I'll definitely take those, keep those in mind.
And so did you, as you were going through this, were there any things, I guess, from other parts of the business? You clearly have other areas of responsibilities that you had. Were there other things perhaps that you learned or gathered from other parts of businesses that you were able to bring into this vegetation management?
Yeah, I think just the process improvement aspect, and I kind of mentioned earlier, we've put some tools in place, but maybe don't take full advantage of the whole tool and keep pushing on that and making sure that when we're doing these process improvements, that we continue to make them as goals and to help with our workflow, our efficiencies. And we work pretty lean. I feel like we have a fairly lean workforce. And so I think the leadership, particularly the people that are leaders, have a lot on their plate. So I think they're pushing because they can see that they need to. They just don't have the time to commit from a heavy workload standpoint if they're not efficient. And then I've preached on data a bunch, but using the data, we have a lot of data, whether it be outage management data for work orders or our reliability numbers, and take that data and use it to our advantage because we have limited resources, we have limited time. Let's make sure that what we're putting that time into is the most effective. And I think it's really that piece. And so I think that's why we're as excited as we are about adding the AI dash aspect of it to it for data and for efficiencies with the workflow processes that'll be in place there. And then particularly the data is what the biggest piece I'm excited about there.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think the opportunities to use technology to help solve these problems is really exciting. Usually companies that are able to take a manual process and then automate it, they save time and usually money. A lot of times people think about this as you're just going to slash the workforce. But I think certainly what I've found, and it sounds like from the way you're structured with the folks that you have, you really are repurposing sort of some of the work that they do. And honestly, sometimes I think you're just giving them more time to do the work that they're already responsible for. For example, if you've got vegetation OCs or whatever job titles you've given them, they're actually boots on the ground, going out and helping to do the assessment along with some of your contractors. If you can automate that piece, then they can actually spend more time on the things like the work plan and looking and analyzing the work plan to decide when you make certain decisions. They'll just become more efficient about the changes that need to happen. They maybe have more time to spend to give you input on the contracting. They'll have more time to spend on quality control because you still need that aspect of it. Although some of that can also be automated if you can get the imagery that you need once the work is completed. But it just gives your people, I think, more time to do the things that they're already committed to get done.
No, it's a good point that they don't have a lack of things to do, I think
Right.
yeah, so I think making them more efficient and not spending their time on things that is doesn't feel productive.
So let's step back a little bit about the budget. We started this off about the cost increases and the labor market. So historically, when costs go up, what are some of the things, the levers, if you will, that you had to help manage that? What did it look like for Arkansas Valley Electric when it comes to you get a phone call and says, "Hey Barrett, I need you to cut your budget by X amount." What does that look like in terms of process for the way you managed through that?
Yeah. So as right away trim is the biggest budget item we've got, and for good reason. It's important and it improves our reliability more than anything else does. So we spend a lot of money there. So if you're going to cut costs, it's usually at the highest budget item, right? There's been times where, unfortunately, the only choice you have is to shift it, right, and try to say we just don't have we were planning to cut 1,000 miles this year. We're going to have to go to 900 miles. And those are some of the challenges. We've done fairly well with our bid process and our budgeting the last few years that we've stayed on budget. And so that challenge hasn't been here. So now we're at least ahead of that from that standpoint. So now at this point, we're looking into next year and saying, okay, we know we've got to cut costs for next year. How do we do that? So our process has been more around being proactive than reactive. And so I think we're in that mode of proactive with the Dash software, and then looking at, even with the software, we know the software is not going to fix our budget problem completely, but it'll give us the data we need to look at things like, do we move to instead of trying to cut 1,000 miles a year, hopefully what the data shows us is our right of ways are in a good enough position to cut 800 miles next year. And if they aren't, we'll know which 800 miles need to be cut, which is the most effective. And so that's our hope, is where we're headed, to be proactive with the budget slashes.
Yeah, that sounds very promising. And do you envision that to be feeder specific? Are you looking at prioritizing around the feeders, your hazard tree program? Just what does that prioritization look like to you once you have this more improved data?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've thought this through some. We don't have our full deployment up yet for Dash, but I've thought this through a little bit of the way our contract labor is structured. I don't think it would be cost effective to have them bid anything besides feeder level. I think if we get down to smaller segments, their cost is going to go up by the foot, by the mile. And so I think what we're looking at is using the software to identify which are the feeders in the most need, and then make our decisions based around that.
Yep, sounds good. And I think, how does that compare to what you've done in the past? I think in the beginning you talked about being very reactive, and then I think what it sounds like, once you got into the job, you guys made some other decisions where you had a little bit more maybe planning going into it. So how do you transition from where you are now to what you just described with AI Dash?
Yeah, I think back in the early 2000s, late 2010s, that it was pretty reactive. And then a group came into place that put this 6-year rotation in place. And that allowed us at least some structure to be able to cut, but we based it off substation level. So we would pick substations that were in close vicinity to each other, and we would bid it out that way. And that's the way we've historically done that. Just in our pilot that we recently did, we did a whole substation for a pilot. We did a 100-mile pilot. We did one single substation, and what it identified is we could have done better. We wouldn't have to cut that whole substation. It did show us that we could be more nimble and bid out what we needed to. I think that's like you said, that's the direction we're going to make those decisions. Is don't worry so much about the whole substation being cut and staying on a rotation, but cut what actually needs to be cut, because that's going to change annually. And I think we got to get past this point of it's hard to not go to think about it from a rotational standpoint, because that's all we've known for the last 6 years. When we first started talking about it, we said, let's just go to an 8-year rotation. And ultimately that's what we're trying to do, but I don't want to say 8-year rotation. I want to say, let's go to the number of miles that need to be cut next year. And we'll do that again the following year, and we'll continue to do that and do it based on what we need to. The one thing I didn't mention before is we also have a herbicide program that's starting to show effectiveness and help us maintain the right of ways like we would expect. And historically, we've done that with like a 4-year rotation, but it hasn't always lined up with the cut times that we needed it to. And so we weren't super efficient on that. There was times where we're spraying areas that had been cut too long ago, or there was times where we sprayed too soon after a cut. And so I think what our hope is now, if we know early enough in the year for the planning for the following year on what we're going to be mechanically trimming, it would allow us to also plan for the following year for our spray program or our herbicide program and make it even more effective.
Yeah, I think anytime when you have more information, you certainly have the opportunity to better manage. And it sounds like you've already got some lessons learned around the herbicide program. When it comes to, I guess, other aspects of the process, the historical process that you mentioned, is there anything you've learned from the transitioning from the manual, aside from the herbicide, but I think in the overall general management of vegetation, from the data that you used to collect manually to what you're getting automatically now? Or more efficiently, I should say, are they lessons learned there? Did you see gaps? Can you talk about the efficiencies that you've maybe picked up just from transitioning from that?
Yeah, so I think I can tell you the things that made us want to transition to it. Like I said, we don't have our full deployment up yet, and so I don't know that I can talk a lot about what it's going to prove. But I can say the reason we went have gone to that is we definitely know we don't have the manpower to QC everything, but we know there's areas that either that we bid on, paid for to be trimmed that didn't really require much trimming. You'd have sections of line that you're paying by the mile, and they might be a mile, right, that really didn't need to be trimmed, but we paid for it anyways. Or the ability to, I know it'll be a little late on QCing, but if we continue down this road and doing it annually, if we pay for something to be trimmed and somehow we miss that section, if it's not a section that we would have QC'd manually, the software should show us that we paid for it last year, but the encroachment's still within 5 feet of the line. And clearly at that point, we know the contractors didn't cut what they said they were going to cut. And so I think those are the things that we are lacking right now that we want to fix.
Yeah, Barrett, and along those lines, when it comes to work that was performed, I guess, by the contractors, you guys, it sounds like you obviously you have limitations in the amount of people you have to do this. Are you having people going out and spot checking contractors? Is that part of your, I guess, QC plan?
We do. We probably not as much as we need to, but like you said, there's always a balance there of how much time do we have and personnel do we have. But we try to keep a in-house personnel with the contractors. It's helpful for our membership. We want to make sure they're out there and treating our members the same way we would be treating our members. And we have one out there, but stuff get missed. It's pretty, as you can imagine, and a lot of people deal with, it's pretty rural territory. There's some very cross-country areas that are hard to get to by car or foot, and those are going to be the people know that, right? So if somebody's going to skip something, that's what they're going to skip. But so you try to get out there and do those things. Like I said, we have some in-house drones. We've used them a little bit to go out and do some QCing with the drones and do some imagery stuff just to show the program's working and those kinds of things. But yeah, those are things we're doing. But yeah, we could always do better.
Yeah. That's a good point. I think that is the struggle, right? You want to balance the number of employees that you have because there's a cost associated with that too, right? And then you're still trying to get all this other work done. And so I think historically we've done two things. One, on the quality control, you spot check, right? If you've got new contractors, you may spend a little bit more time with them until you build some confidence, right? If you got some who've done very well in the past, you don't spend maybe as much time with them, et cetera. So I think it's a judgment call on that, but then you're just doing the best you can with what you have. And I think the trim cycle plan is over insurance. You just, to your point of, you give them, you might have on a circuit, you might have a mile that, you're paying for the mile, but most of it may not even need to be cut. But you're hopeful that if they do what you ask them to do, regardless of how much work it involved, that it's done. You at the end of that work, you've got the clearances that you need, and hopefully that'll pan out in the reliability numbers. So we do over-insure,
Yeah.
And I think that's the way the utilities have done that. And quite frankly, with the lack of any new technology, that was pretty much the better way, I think, for us all to make sure that our customers got the reliability, that they needed.
Yeah, good points.
Yeah. As we're getting, I guess, in the second half of this, or getting closer to wrapping up, are there things that now that, you look back that you would have done differently, or from the vegetation management perspective, are there lessons learned that you want to share?
Yeah, in lessons learned, I think it's a marathon, not a sprint, and it takes time.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to, you start one of these programs and you want to do it now, right? You want to figure it out within a year, and it doesn't happen that way. It's going to take some time to make a transition. Like you said, this technology adoption, but don't let that discourage the progress that we're making and forget about that. Obviously, the fiber project I mentioned on earlier, it caused us to learn some lessons on our reclear program, probably more so of just know that we didn't QC everything, because now we saw some areas because we had crews out there in them that we thought were trimmed but weren't, and now we were having to go back and fix it. So we touched on that as far as if you had to do over, I'd put more time into that. Hindsight would say, yeah, let's put more time into that. And then probably the biggest thing I wish we would have had time, or it's easy to get caught up and just keep going down the road we're going. But in hindsight, I mentioned this earlier, the herbicide program hasn't matched up well with the mechanical trimming. And I think we're seeing its effects now, and it's working, and it just didn't work as quick as we probably would have liked for it to. And we probably should have pumped the brakes a little bit and restructured sooner than now. But I think it's easy to say that, but we didn't really have the data either to know that. Those are the biggest things I wish we had the ability to try sooner.
Those are very good insights, and I think a lot of people that'll resonate very well with them. So I appreciate you sharing that. As far as the next part of this journey, you talked a little bit about some of the technologies briefly, but can you expound a little bit more what you're using? You mentioned LiDAR, you mentioned a pilot, AI Dash. Can you talk a little bit more about that technology, what you're using, and maybe what you're seeing so far?
Yeah, so the biggest change right now is that we did move forward with the full deployment AI Dash. We're excited about having that up and running. We're shooting for fall, is I believe when we're going to have our data. That's if anyone hasn't gone through that, I know the folks that work for AI Dash know the amount of time that it takes to put the kind of data together and imagery together and collect the data from us, and it's a lengthy process. And I guess that might be one of the other things I'd have done sooner. I'd have signed that paper quicker, so we could have got moving forward. But I think it's that holistic approach, right? Use the imagery, use the outage data, use the growth rates, all those pieces to make our decisions rather than just what we've done in the past of saying, yeah, let's just go cut it. To your point, that was the only way we knew how to do it and make sure it was cut right and make sure the reliability numbers were impacted. But I think this is going to allow us to know for sure the money that we're spending is being well spent. And I think that's where we're headed. See the full deployment through, have it done in the fall of this year, and hopefully help us with our budget season for next year. And then make sure that we take advantage of all the tools that the software offers. Don't just use it to get the data on the growth rates and the danger trees and all those pieces, but actually implement it in a way that we can get some buy-in from not only the in-house guys we got, but the contractors to take advantage of having that software available to them and having that digital information in front of them, but also getting the information back to us. Make sure that it's a two-way communication and not just we're pumping that data out to them and not getting information back. Because we're excited about having it in everybody's hands that now they don't have to make a call and say, hey, there's a tree, that's near the line that y'all need to take a look at. They can flag it and get that data back to I think it's talking to your point you made earlier, our right-of-way supervisor spends an incredible amount of time on managing people and contractors and making sure the workflow's out there. And if he can have that data be easily transmitted to him, it will help his job be more efficient. And then I think the in-house versus the biggest question and probably the biggest decision to make is the in-house versus contract labor. Do we make a transition to do some of that in-house on our Reclear program? And what does that look like? And what's the spread? Are we efficient that way? Does the software allow us to make those changes that we need to? But I think that's further down the road.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like you're using the satellite imagery to collect information on your lines, and I'm assuming that's around just what the clearances are, right? And then you mentioned some other inputs, the soil data, weather patterns, I think, and all that. So that's all getting fed into that model as well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm learning, right? So I'm learning
yeah,
through this AI Dash program and process, and yes. So I think I should have been more clear. Yeah, the basic of it is AI Dash takes the satellite imagery as the base of that, but then they take a lot of our data, where our lines, make sure the lines are where we said they were, and then use those growth rates. And like you said, they have the ability to do weather related stuff. What does that look like? Are there areas that are growing quicker than others? Implement what our 6-year rotation would have been. When's the last time we cut it, so they can have some data, and how quick did it grow over the last 6 years or 4 years, and try to forecast that out so that we have the ability to know when do we look like we'll be back out there.
yeah. And so they're giving you, I guess, once all the data is collected, they're giving you a point of view of what you need to do. Is that
Yeah, so it'll look
you-
like it'll actually come back in as a map form of here's the line segments that need to be trimmed. It's not an imagery. So what we're seeing isn't looking at an image and we can see where the tree limb is almost touching the line. It's more of a flagged data approach where it's our line set, it's our electric distribution line set, and the areas that need to be trimmed will be flagged based on the growth, encroachment on the growth. And then there's a danger tree section that would say, yeah, here's the areas that are the highest risk. And I'm giving a real broad, obviously,
Yeah.
talk to AI Dash folks, they'll do a lot better job than I'm doing on that. But especially the technical folks, they've been good to work through that process and do training so that we can know what we're getting. But the other piece that I mentioned was there's a whole workflow aspect to that will allow you, once where those line sets are, and line segments are, that you can distribute those to different contractors. You can assign that work to who you need to assign it to, and then they can also respond with when those are done. So a whole flagging process that allows you to flag those areas on when you want the work done and when it has been done.
Yeah. Barrett, it sounds like you save quite a bit of time in this process, right? So you're going from the data's being collected, it's being processed, and then you're getting I guess, this point of view that says things are flagged, this is what you need to do. Your contractors can go out and do the work and then report it as being complete. You got any sense of how much time you're saving in that process? Do you know that yet? I know you're early in the pilot, but
Yeah, I don't think I have a good sense of, I have a good sense of from a just when we go through our, like you talked about earlier, the way we were doing that before was pretty manual. We go to our mapping department and say, hey, give us this 1,000 miles of maps and we'll send those to the contractors. There's a, that they, AI Dash has the ability to do a bid package. And then one other piece that I think is helpful is also the tracking aspect of it. Once you get those bids back, you can enter your cost in there. So then the following years, the system starts to learn what you're spending per mile and do a good job of estimating what you're going to spend before you actually go get it bid, and make sure there's some accountability there. So if bids start coming in extremely high, you might say, oh, we might need to check with another contractor. So I think all those pieces right now are I don't know how much time it's going to save because we don't even have access to the data. So it's kind of like
yeah.
it's adding tools that we haven't had in the past, and it's hard for me to say how much I think it's going to impact us from a time standpoint.
Okay, that's fair enough, and I look forward to us having that conversation one day in the
Yeah,
future. At the
yeah.
end of the day, it's going to be from your level, being able to see how much time are you really giving back to your employees to work on the things that you find to be most important, right? It'll help you to reprioritize. So it'll be an interesting discussion when you get a little bit further along in this journey to hear and see what that looks like. We haven't really talked about storms yet. Can you share a little bit about what your experience has been as far as being hit with the bad storms and really how you're handling that from a grid hardening perspective? Has that driven you to take on more grid hardening programs? And anyway, is there anything in there that you could share with us?
Yeah, I touch on it. We live in Tornado Alley. We're used to storms and some that can cause potentially pretty major outages. Actually, the most recent one was a snowstorm, which was unexpected for us. It caused more outages than we would have ever expected. So we have a range of storms that can cause us some damage. Like I said before, right of way is one of the biggest things that we can spend money on to reduce those. So you don't have trees falling through the line when the storm does come in. But we also invest in quite a bit in this fiber smart grid and project to give us another data point, right? So now our downline devices, we're connecting to our SCADA system and trying to harden that way so that we can be more responsive with our response times, more efficient with the response times where we know where the issues are rather than having to manually go look for where the problem is. Hopefully we can isolate things quicker that way. We're already seeing the rewards of those devices being online and having control of them. But yeah, I imagine it's like everybody else. The storm hits, it's not fun, right? It's a couple of days of painful, especially broke poles and how do you get there? But even the piece of it of having the trees not there to fall through the line, being able to get a truck through our right of ways is just as important too, so that response time is quick enough so they're not trying to fight their way through trees and brush to get there.
That's right. Yeah, and I think when you can collect data and information very quickly, I do see that. I think for what you're experiencing from being able to manage vegetation just daily, I think we'll see the benefits of that for storm restoration too. You'll be able to get a snapshot of what's going on everywhere on your system. And then that information will be analyzed, and then you'll be able to quickly report out things like this particular road is closed. So by trucks, it may
Yeah.
even influence where you stage your crews. There's just a lot of opportunity, I think, out there with this added information from a safety standpoint, being able to report to the public exactly where down lines are. You'll be able to do that faster than having to put your own people in harm's way to go and do those assessments.
Yeah, I think that what we call our control center is becoming more and more sophisticated, right? And what
Yeah.
they have available to them from a data standpoint grows every day. And one thing intriguing about the AI Dash software was their ability to storm forecast. I don't think with our pop-up storms, I'm not sure, and they weren't sure whether it would be as beneficial. But when you look at hurricanes, people might be affected by that. They had some really cool tools that would forecast maybe where the damage is going to be, and especially because they know where the right of way issues are, and that's usually what
Yeah.
causes the damage. And so I think there's some intriguing things there.
Yep. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I know we're getting close here. I'm just take a quick look at these questions that we had. Looks like we've answered the questions around the budgets and how you prioritize feeders versus hazard tree. And then we had another one around post-work auditing, quality control. And I think we talked a little bit about the process, but it's probably one other point to make that is as you have this data, you're now going to have the opportunity, it sounds like, that you'll be able to take an image of the work after a contractor has completed it. And so instead of maybe spot checking, you can actually look at the entire section that was performed. And so that would be an added benefit that you can get from using other technology. It sounds like you did that with LiDAR previously as well.
Yeah, not necessarily LiDAR, but just drone imagery, right?
With drone, I'm sorry, yeah, drone imagery.
So actual imagery. So we'd go out and view it that way. I think I mentioned earlier the AI dash. It's going to be a little bit delayed because you're not going to be doing it live. You're not going to be there. AI dash isn't going to be bringing in live imagery every day or every month. It's going to be more of an annual thing. You at least know that either something didn't happen and you need to do something about it moving forward. And so it does give you, without that very manual process of being out there in the field.
Yep. Good deal. And so Barrett, as we're getting close to the end, I don't see any additional questions that we haven't responded to. What do you see as some of the other challenges and things for the industry as far as we talk a little bit about technology, there's storms, there's budget pressures, inflation, workforce, you hit a little bit on that. What would you say are maybe the top three things that you're concerned about that are going to hit this industry over the next couple of years?
Well, I think you just named all the top three. Yeah, I think we talked about workforce as a challenge, right?
Yeah.
It's becoming more and more of a challenge. How do you retain a talented workforce? And so I think that is probably the biggest challenge we have is because we have a talented workforce. We want them to stay here. We want them to enjoy their work. We want them to be rewarded for being talented, and we want to maintain that. That and then the budget stuff really still scares me. I guess not even necessarily the budget stuff. We kind of talked about budget stuff, but actually procurement of the materials too is a challenge. We can't get stuff like we would expect. And so there's always that piece of, are you going to run out of some of the materials we need, or can we get equipment? We struggle to be able to get some of the big equipment we need for maintaining our right of ways and building new line. So we're treating our old equipment very well, making sure it'll last. And so
Yeah.
Those are really the big ones for me.
I think the equipment one is one we haven't really talked about a lot, even over these three episodes that we've done. And I think you raise a really good point. We saw through the pandemic, the shortages. We saw the workforce issues to hamper that. We saw the shutdown of manufacturing facilities. And we saw the reliance of just the parts that come from overseas, right? And so now that China is opening back up and you see the manufacturing facilities starting to ramp back up, they still have a backlog that they're working through. So taking care of those equipment, that's a really great idea. I do think we're probably a couple of years before we get the relief that we really want, right, in that. So I think you raise a really good point around that.
Yeah,
I think,
multi-year lead times are common now. So
yeah,
it's hard that's a budget constraint, right? You're trying to budget and stay within a budget in a certain time frame, and you don't get your equipment delivered when you expect it. And now what? And so those are huge challenges.
yeah. I think one thing that we'll all get a little more comfortable with as we move from this, I guess, this overinsured way that we used to manage things is I see us having a change in the contracting strategy, right? Just contracting 101, tells you the better information that you can give to your contractor, the better price you'll get, right? You remove the unknowns, right? You mitigate the risks as much as you can on the front end, and then they won't be pricing in all those additional costs for the unknowns. So if you believe that theory, then it seems to point to that with better information, more accurate information that we're going to be able to collect through this new technology, that we may have better information that we give the contractors on the front end when we're bidding out. And so it'll be interesting to see where we land, but I do think utilities will have changes in their bid strategies. They'll have changes in the way they actually contract. I think there's still going to be, for some utilities, it's still going to make sense to do dollar per line mile type contracts. I think you're going to see more strategic T&E type work so that you can be flexible to move to where you want to be, where you need to be. And I think we're going to get better at knowing what type of equipment we need to address those work and not just leave it to the contractor, right, to decide. So that the more of that on the front end, I think the better you can expect. Do I really need do I need a full crew to do this? Or can I get a couple guys with the giraffes and move up and down the right of way? Those things really affect, do I need climbers? Those things really affect the makeup of the crew and thus the cost.
Yeah, that's a good point that we didn't bring up about the software. All those were things that the imagery, the AI dash with the imagery would be able to help you identify in some areas. Do you need a giraffe? Do you need a bucket? Do you need climbers? What do you need? So I think knowing that going in, and like you said, if you can give that to the contractors, I think it'll take some time for them to buy into the fact that it's accurate and how they bid on
Yeah.
it. Ultimately, it's a competitive process for them, right? And they want to win those bids. And so if you have those two pieces of it and they trust the data and they know it's competitive, you should get the best price.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of changes along the way. And I think even on the quality control, even though you're taking snapshots year after year on a big project, you might be able to go and schedule just another set of satellite imagery if it makes sense to do that. I think the cost for that has come down quite a bit. We're seeing the technology costs are coming down. More satellites are going up in the area. You're getting these announcements, it seems like monthly. There are more things going up to look down. So I think there's quite a bit there. This is all very good discussion. Any final thoughts or comments? Or, and I guess maybe if you don't, we'll see if there's anybody in the chat. But any last few things, Barrett, that you maybe want to share with us?
I don't think I have anything else to share. I appreciate the opportunity. And like I said, I look forward to meeting new people through this process and working with AI Dash and learning because I clearly need some learning. Keep moving
Well,
forward.
I think we're all on a journey, right?
Yeah.
I think I think that's really the key. And I think the more that we share about these experiences, the better. I think that just really helps us to get there. And it is just about the best way to, it's really about optimization. This is the best way to use this technology. And I think the things you shared with us about your experience in that transition, that change management, those things are very helpful. I think that's a key piece that I think companies miss, whether we're talking about vegetation management or any new technology or new processes. I think the change management is the last thing that we usually put the energy and the resources behind. And that's the pain point, I think, for a lot of our employees when we try to do that. All right, let me just take one last quick look in the chat room here. I think we've answered all the questions. There was one around how do we use the data to build our bid packages. There's still an unknown about that, but I think you've touched a little bit on that, how they have the platform that actually does that. And it just flags the areas for you. And then from that, it produces the maps.
Yeah, if just a quick touch on that. I mean, my understanding is that's going to require some input from us, right? Of us,
Yeah.
what sections do we want to do and structure that ahead of time before that bid package goes out. I think we're in control of that through the software at that point. So those are all things I have to still learn how to navigate and do those pieces. So I can't talk heavily on that. Hopefully in the future, if y'all ask me back, we can, years from now, I might know a little more about it.
Barrett, I think we've learned a lot from you today about your experiences. We really appreciate you sharing your journey as you go in vegetation management. Sounds like from the time you got into that role, even till now, right? Not just, yeah. So it's not just about this new technology, but just from the time you got there. And so that's very helpful, very insightful. I think the area that you're in has some unique challenges, right? You talked about being in that tornado alley. So obviously that has some challenges. And I think the terrain that you have is pretty unique too, right? So it's just not all plains, right?
Yeah.
It's not flat at all, right?
No, not at all.
But we appreciate your honesty. We appreciate you really giving us some insight into your journey there.